My parents scammed me out of $90,000 and disappeared. Then I found out my wife helped them. Now I'm suing all of them and filing for divorce. I run a chain of restaurants with a couple of my buddies from business school. It's a moderately successful business, and we make decent money. However, I had been saving up to start something of my own on the side and expand. Last month, my parents, who are 64 and 63, told me they were in financial trouble and needed my help to bail them out. Otherwise, they might lose their home and all their property. They told me that, apparently, before I was born, they had borrowed money from a distant relative of my father's, his uncle. My father had just started working when they found out my mother was pregnant with me. She had to quit her job because she couldn't handle both at the same time. My dad wasn't bringing home enough money, and they were struggling with bills, so they borrowed money from my dad's uncle and promised to return it in a couple of years. But instead of returning it, they continued to borrow for the first few years until my dad had a substantial income of his own. By that time, I was already in middle school, and they had a considerable amount of debt. They begged his uncle for more time, at least until I graduated from college, and then they would slowly start paying him back. But years passed, and they didn't return the money. My parents thought they were free of the debt when this uncle passed away a couple of years ago, but his son inherited everything and is now hounding them to repay the money or he will involve the law. Everything was off the books, so my parents hadn't been taking him seriously, thinking he would never be able to prove they had borrowed money with the intention of returning it. But a few months ago, the guy gave them a final warning and told them to cough up the money or he would file a lawsuit against them. It would be easy for him because he is well connected. That's when my parents started taking him seriously and tried to return the money they owed his father. My parents told me they had given him all they had saved but still needed $90,000 to be debt-free. They said they had already blown through their retirement funds and couldn't afford to lose their house and other properties, so they were counting on me. Like a total fool, I decided to give them the money because I didn't want them to suffer. I did ask to speak with the guy to buy more time, but my parents insisted he didn't want to risk it because he already had a short fuse. I trusted my parents and gave them the money. This transaction was also off the books, which was my biggest mistake. A week after I sent them the money, I realized I had been blocked everywhere. My parents were nowhere to be found. They had sold their house a couple of days after receiving the money and moved out without telling anyone. Their neighbors told me about it. I waited every day for them to come back, but they didn't. After about 2 weeks, I came to terms with the fact that my parents had scammed me, and I had lost my life savings. It was a terrible time for me, and the only consolation was my wife, who kept reassuring me that everything would be fine, that I was still working, and that I could always earn the money back and start afresh. But it had taken me almost 15 years to save up $90,000, and I couldn't imagine working another 15 years just to recover what I had lost. I tried to work something out with my lawyer, but I didn't even know where my parents were, making it difficult to reach a solution. I had almost given up when I received an email from my parents 2 weeks ago. They told me they were sorry they had scammed me and lied because it was actually a gambling debt they were trying to pay off. They knew I would flip out if I found out the truth about my dad's gambling, so they made up a story about their financial struggles to make me sympathize with them and extract the money. They were right, I probably wouldn't have given them the money if I had known my dad had been gambling and that's how they lost their money. But that was no reason for them to lie to me and scam me. They claimed they had used the money to pay off their debts and sold the house to move away because they didn't think I would want to be around them anymore. They hoped I could forgive them someday. The only thing I felt after reading that email was pure rage, and I instantly forwarded it to my lawyer so we could use it to sue them. But when I told my wife, she said it wasn't a good idea to go after them because they had been through so much. I couldn't understand why she was siding with them. They had stolen my money, and we had proof of it. We could get it back. We argued about it, and she told me I was being heartless because these were my parents, and they had just made one tiny mistake. She convinced me that I was selfish and that I should be more compassionate. She even argued that my father's gambling addiction was out of his control and that I should be a better son instead of worrying about the money. It was a frustrating conversation because my wife kept making it seem like I was the one in the wrong. I started second-guessing myself and told my lawyer to put everything on hold because I wasn't sure if I wanted to proceed anymore. After our argument, I began contemplating whether my wife was right. I wondered if I had been too hard on people. I almost believed that I shouldn't go after my parents and that the money didn't matter as much. My wife convinced me that I was being materialistic. A few days later, I accidentally came across a text on my wife's phone from my mother, and it changed everything. I noticed my wife's phone lighting up with text notifications and, out of curiosity, I decided to check her messages. I knew her phone's password, so it wasn't hard to access. I started reading her texts when I received one from my mother. I was shocked to find out that my wife had been in cahoots with my parents. My mother asked if my wife had convinced me not to go through with the lawsuit and mentioned that if I sued them, the deal was off. As I scrolled further, I realized that my wife had been working with my parents since they sent that email. My wife had initially threatened my parents, telling them she would take the text to the cops if they didn't return the money. But then, my parents offered her half of the money they received from selling their house to keep her mouth shut and convince me not to file the lawsuit. Heartbroken, I decided to take screenshots of the conversation and record the screen while scrolling through the texts, sending everything to myself. Then, I packed my things and moved out. I ignored all of my wife's attempts to contact me and called my lawyer to prepare the petition. I decided to sue my wife as well and filed for divorce. She kept texting me, saying she was sorry and that she did it all for us, but none of it mattered anymore. I couldn't believe she had manipulated me and lied for money. Even if I forgave her, I could never trust her again. So, my lawyer went ahead with the petitions, and both my parents and my wife were served. It took a lot of effort to locate my parents, but we managed to have them served in person. Since then, my wife has been losing her mind, begging me to reconsider the divorce, saying she made a mistake and wants to make it up to me. But I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like a jerk because I know I'm breaking her heart, but I don't have any other option. I spent 17 years with this woman, and she told me she was doing this for us, but I can't believe her anymore. I feel so confused. Refused I have for getting divorced from my wife of 17 years, because she was manipulating me into forgiving my parents. It's been 3 weeks since I filed the petitions, and I have blocked my wife because I don't think I have anything left to say to her anymore. She kept trying to talk to me and make me come back for about a week before I finally blocked her. Part of the reason was that so many people commented here and told me I needed to make a run for it because my wife was a huge red flag. I feel like the only reason I had even been questioning myself was because I loved her, and I desperately wanted to hold on to the belief that she would never do something like this to me. But I couldn't ignore the facts anymore. She had betrayed me, and she had manipulated me. She probably wouldn't even have ever told me the truth herself, and I had to find out by chance. After a betrayal of this degree, I don't think I could ever bring myself to trust her again. So, no matter how much I loved her and wanted to be with her, I had to let her go for the sake of my own sanity. Blocking her was actually quite a relief for me, and I definitely have a much clearer head now. The legal proceedings against my parents and my wife have already started, and things are pretty much going in my favor right now. I know for a fact that I will be getting my money back, so I'm not too worried about the future. My parents are going to pay for all the lies they made up, and my lawyer and I are going to make sure of that. They already looked pretty unhappy on the day we met for our first settlement negotiation, but my goal is to make sure they look and feel just as unhappy as I had felt when they scammed me. My wife tried to talk to me that day as well, and it was difficult for me, but I dodged her somehow and made my way back to the hotel without having to interact with her. Now, I just have to keep doing that until this is all over. It's probably going to be really difficult, but I know that I do not want to speak to my wife under any circumstances. It's mostly because I'm afraid that speaking to her might make me weak again. I can't afford to let that happen. I don't want to go back to her because I know that could be the worst move I make, and I know very well that she can totally manipulate me into coming back. She almost did it once, and when it comes to her, I practically have no self-control. So it's best for me not to take that risk at all. It's already hard enough for me to meet her and fight her legally, I can't do more. Update 2. So, my wife decided to contact me today in person and showed up at the hotel I've been living in. When I received the call from the hotel front desk and learned that my wife was here to see me, I was really confused because I hadn't told anybody where I was except my lawyer and a couple of close friends I trusted. I knew they wouldn't tell her. When I spoke to her, I found out that for the past couple of days, she had been visiting every hotel in and around town looking for me. Now that she had finally found me, she wasn't going to leave without having a conversation with me. I didn't know what else to do, so I invited her up to my room because I didn't want to fight with her in the lobby. Once we were in my room, I waited for her to start talking because I had nothing to say to her. After some awkward silence, she told me she was here to ask me to stop the divorce proceedings, and I just couldn't believe she was bringing this up again. I told her that it was bad enough she was here, she shouldn't make things worse for herself by backing me into a corner. I made it very clear that I was not going to entertain any discussion about this. But she told me she would testify against my parents and make everything much easier for me if I just decided to stay with her. It was ridiculous and exasperating because I had to explain to her that's not how things work. She couldn't just turn on my parents and expect me to take her back. She had really screwed up our relationship, and there was no fixing it anymore, mostly because I didn't want to fix it. I wanted to leave, and I had made that pretty clear to her, but she just couldn't accept it. I tried to tell her that it didn't matter to me what she did anymore because I was fighting to end this marriage, not to make it work. She started crying and asked me why I was punishing her when she had already learned her lesson. It was so absurd that I couldn't help but chuckle because she was making it sound like I was a disgruntled school teacher and not her husband whom she had betrayed and manipulated. So, I told her I wasn't punishing her. I was just trying to protect myself and do what was best for me. Right now, staying away from her was the best thing I could do for myself. But she continued crying and told me she was doing this for us and wasn't ready to throw away over a decade of her life because of a stupid mistake. I didn't know what to say because I also felt miserable about the divorce. But if I couldn't even trust her, what was the point of being with her? That's what I needed her to understand, so I thought I would explain it to her gently and have this conversation once and for all so she would learn to give up and move on. I told her I couldn't be with her, even though I loved her, because she had hurt me and broken my trust, and that's something you can't take back no matter how much you try. So now, she could do whatever she wanted, but it wasn't going to undo the damage, and I would never be able to forget what she had put me through. Even if we stayed together and canceled the divorce, it wouldn't make any sense because I would just keep doubting her and questioning her, and that would make both of us miserable. So it wasn't just for me, but it was also in her best interest to go through with the divorce instead of trying to fight it. I thought I was getting through to her and making progress until she got back on her feet and told me I was wrong and that she would keep fighting for us to be together. Apparently, unlike me, she loved me and wasn't ready to give up on our marriage because of a misunderstanding. Then she walked out, and I've been sitting here for the past hour wondering what to do because this is really frustrating. This could be a clear-cut divorce and an easy process, but she is bent on making it a lot more difficult than it needs to be. I told my lawyer about it, and I don't think there's much we can do because if my wife doesn't want to get divorced, there's very little we can do to speed up the process. It's really frustrating, but I can't do anything about this. Update 3. Hi, I haven't updated you guys in a while, so I thought I'd drop in and let you know that the legal process is still ongoing, but I'm winning this for sure. My parents are just trying to buy themselves more time. My wife is trying to fight against the divorce still, even though it's been almost 2 months since the proceedings began. I feel bad for her at this point because she's obviously in denial about this whole mess. Her family isn't speaking to her either, presumably because they found out the truth. It must be hard, but again, it's not my fault. Today my parents and wife were finally ordered to return all the money to me. I have to hand it to them and their lawyers. They fought pretty hard, even though they knew they were going to be on the losing side of this because the cards were all stacked against them. I wish I could post a picture of them when they realized that they had lost, but just know that it was incredibly satisfying. I think I'll be holding on to that feeling for a really long time. As for my wife, we are definitely going to get divorced, and at this point, it doesn't really matter if she agrees with it or not. The legal process is just an obligation, but in my head, I'm already separated from her and have nothing to do with her. It's been a great run, but unfortunately, it has to come to an end because of her own stupidity and foolishness, not to mention how selfish and manipulative she was. I have moved from the hotel into an apartment of my own because we don't know who is going to get the house in the divorce court. I'm hoping that it's me because I feel like I was wronged, so I deserve the house more. We still have to divide all our property, and I think it's best for us to just sell everything that we own together and split whatever we get. I think I'm being pretty generous with it, considering the fact that she had tried to screw me out of my share of the money by siding with my parents. She isn't trying to contact me anymore, which is a relief because I think by now she should know that this is not going to work. I have also started thinking about my business plan, which I will actively start working on as soon as I'm done with the divorce. Things are finally beginning to look up, and I have a lot of work to do ahead of me. I have to rebuild my life and learn how to live on my own. I feel like it's going to be a long journey, but it's going to be worth it. If you are liking it, follow us for more stories.